You're listening to Brandon Sports Talk, interviewing professional athletes and Paralympians and Olympians. And now for your professional athlete interview and your host, Brandon P.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the USA Paralympian paracycling athlete, Chris Murphy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to get into the sport of paracycling?
Um, I don't know that I knew that I wanted to get into it as much as I just kept exploring my interests. I got interested in riding my bike, not competing, just riding. And once I understood that paracycling actually existed as an avenue to do something with my disability, as an opportunity instead of something that's always been a negative in my life. I started thinking about maybe I want to give this a try and see how it goes, and that's kind of the attitude I took at first. And to tell a long story in a very short way, the first time I competed in track cycling at national championships, um, my was my first time doing a race called the Kilo, which is currently my best race. I all it is 1 kilometer from the gate start, and you just go as hard as you can, as fast as you can, and the duration is it's just over a minute long. I think my first kilo was a minute 10.6 or something like that. And when I finished, all I could think of was like, holy crap, that hurt. What was that? you know? And then a lot of people were giving me like a lot of attention, like coaching staff and other athletes, and I didn't understand it. I was just like, what was that good? And to give you scope, I mean, that was my first race in Carson, the track we have in the Los Angeles area, which is actually a fairly slow track. And I didn't have particularly fast wheels, all things that make you faster. But a guy, and this was in 2013. So one of the guys that actually got to compete in the London Games, in the kilo, rolled a 111 at the pinnacle of his career. And my very first race, I went faster than him on a slower track, and I didn't know it. So that I didn't really realize that until I got into the national team structure. So I kind of fell into it, and once opportunities presented themselves, I just took these opportunities.
What was it like getting into the para circuit for paracycling, and what has it been like, obviously representing Team USA?
Getting into the circuit, I think I would liken it to go into college. And you show up, you don't know what you're doing. You feel like you don't know what you're doing. There's a ton of people there that look like they know what they're doing, and you don't know anybody. It's just, to me, it was very similar in that it was very intimidating, in both my first experiences with college and with racing. But then, like, like every year you do it, you learn more. You feel a little less like a fish out of water, and then all of a sudden you're like a junior or senior, and you've been around, you know how things are going, and you recognize people a lot more, and it's a very similar experience, I would say, to that.
How has it been like, obviously representing Team USA on the paracycling side?
So representing Team USA is always, to be cliche, it's always an honor. I mean, it's hard to get on the team. I didn't necessarily, I've had trouble making teams before. Because I mean, I've always been a good track rider, but when I first started my career, I was also trying to be a road rider. And I did make some road teams, but they're very hard to make just because it's so competitive. Both because the international field is very competitive, but also the domestic field is very competitive. There's so many strong athletes in Team USA, and there's only a certain amount of spots that get to go on these trips to compete. So earning one of those spots is incredibly difficult, and being actually able to do it feels like a huge accomplishment.
How is it like obviously competing on the world championship level from 2014 to 2017?
That was interesting just because in 2014 I got thrown right into the fire. I just started competing in para, and I remember they had me do one team event, the team sprint. And this is an event that Team USA medaled in at the games. They got a bronze medal in London. And this was the first World Championships since the games. And they put me in the last minute, and I had never done it. I didn't know what I was doing. I was scared out of my mind. And I mean, we rode as well as we could. And I definitely made some just some technical errors, and we ended up getting fourth, but I don't think my errors would have changed that fact anyway. I think we were going to get fourth even if I had known what I was doing. But yeah, I mean, every one of those years, I progressively got to know more and more athletes from other countries. It became less intimidating and more of a family, and not only meeting people, but actually becoming friends with people from other countries, good friends with other people, earning respect of other competitors. It's a very interesting transformation that happens when you keep at it.
Going into the 2016 season, what was that like preparing for the Paralympics to go to Rio? And what was that moment like when you did get to Rio?
So that was a very interesting circumstance for me, specifically because I had broken my collarbone 3 weeks before trials. And I had actually had a pretty good year doing road during swim trials. I remember winning nationals, and I remember just firing on all cylinders, essentially leading up to trials. But I crashed in a race 3 weeks before trials, and I broke my collarbone, which is not ideal, to say the least. But I trained through it, and honestly, in that regard, my specific disability was somewhat helpful because I have nerve damage in my left arm and shoulder. It's called Erb's palsy. And because of that, I have limited sensation, which also means limited pain or like limited pain and high pain tolerance, because there's certain things I don't feel like. When I broke my collarbone, I knew something wasn't right, like something felt off, but I didn't know it was broken for about 5 days. Um, so, but at the same time, racing on a broken collarbone was extremely painful. Even with all the nerve damage, it was very painful. So I didn't make the team initially. I was bummed for sure, but I still like riding my bike. So I rode my bike when I could, with just the aim of enjoying riding and trying to not get out of shape for the next season. I'd go to the gym and do what I could just for that same sentiment. But then about maybe 2 weeks before the games, I got a call. Well, I was out riding my bike, and I got a call from our high performance director, and he explained a situation that was totally off my radar, in that the country of Russia was banned by the IPC from competing in Rio because of the Russian systematic state-sponsored doping. Um, and when that was upheld by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, all their spots in the games were reallocated to other nations. And the international governing body for cycling named me specifically to go. So I got a ticket to go to the games 2 weeks before the games. So it wasn't really real games preparation, but I mean, I'd been writing. It was just very, very unusual.
What was that feeling like when you did get that ticket to go to Rio to compete in your first Paralympic Games?
I mean, everything about it was surreal. I mean, I honestly couldn't believe it was happening. And I've had a couple other experiences that just mirrored that, like no way, there's no way this is actually happening. Like I got a call and then 2 days later I'm on an airplane to a training camp. I had to tell my boss where I was working at the time, hey, I have to go do this thing. I'll be back in 3 or 4 weeks. Um, and no, it was very surreal. I was very excited, and I made a very strong point in my head every single day since I got that phone call until the games ended, that it was a very special opportunity, especially given the circumstance that I got to go. It was, a 1 in a million chance, essentially, the way it happened, and I was not going to take anything for granted, including the last minute training that I did. Any racing, it was hard. Like, that's fine. I was there doing it, and I was chasing after. I was actually being able to fulfill an intent that I had for several years.
While at Rio, what was it like competing in the road cycling and getting to cycle the roads of Rio and see the beautiful self of Rio?
Rio really was interesting. Um, Being there was it impacted me quite a bit, just because even coming from the airport to the village, I mean, you drive on the highway and you can see all the favelas on the hillsides, and you can, just knowing that all that poverty exists just right there, and just how like much of a dichotomy there was in the culture. And didn't I didn't really know what to expect when actually racing on the roads. But when we actually got to the road racing aspects, it was awesome. The people there were great. There are lots of people on the roadsides where it was convenient to do so. The road race course itself was kind of a course of two halves, where the first half of the course was just kind of a flat out and back kind of hot dog shaped course along a beachside boulevard. And I mean, I had ridden my bike on roads like that several times in California, where I'm from. And I mean, it wasn't necessarily that different, but it's beautiful. But then the second part of the race was actually through kind of the jungle area and the hilly area. And there's just like terrain, road types of road designs and engineering I'd never seen before. We raced through what I would loosely call like a jungle village. It was very surreal. It was very interesting, very cool,
Of
very cool.
course, competing on the road, what is that like? Obviously, having just a regular road bike versus going into the indoor track and having a different type of bike.
Um, the road bike is interesting in that I mean, it's a more complicated machine than a track bike is. A track bike is it's a one gear bike that's a fixed gear. There are no hand brakes, there are no gear shifters. If you want to go faster, you just pedal faster. If you want to go slower, you just pedal slower. It's pretty basic in that regard. Whereas on the road, the bikes themselves are more complicated. They have, at that time, 11 speeds. Now they're into 12 and 13. For my disability, I find it very useful to have electronic shifting systems, just because they're more reliable. And what that is essentially is, instead of levers that you actuate on the handlebars to change gears, you just click a button that's very similar in feel to clicking the button of a mouse on your computer. And that was actually, once I got a version of that for my bike, that was a pretty big game changer for my road cycling career, and just how much more reliable shifting was. And it removed a lot of barriers, I would say. But road racing itself, you're compare it back to the track. On the track, you go in one direction, it's always a left-hand turn, and the banking of the track really takes care of most of the turning for you, so you don't really have to think about much. On the road, you have all kinds of varying degrees of terrain, people that you're riding with, ability levels, what's happening in the race, and it's just way more chaotic.
What was that experience like getting to compete on the track side of at Rio and competing on the tracks of Rio?
The competing on the track in Rio is very interesting. Um, Again, because I didn't have any real preparation, like I just kind of went into it. Um, I had to set very realistic goals for myself. And one was, top goal would be, if I was doing my pursuit, I wanted to hit, this time, just for my own standards. And then I found out I was going in a head-to-head race against the Brazilian. So I was like, well, I'm going against the Brazilian in Brazil. I want to shut the crowd up. I want to beat this guy. I want to catch him because in a pursuit race, essentially you have two racers starting on opposite sides of the track, and then you both go at the same time. And at least in the finals format, if you catch the other rider, then you win, and it doesn't matter if you completed the distance or not. So it's a very interesting race because there's a couple of different ways to approach it. But just for my own goal making, I was like, I want to catch him. And I mean, this is a guy that when I started racing, he would catch and pass me. But I managed to pick up all of those goals that I had outlined for that race. I started racing, and the crowd was just crazy loud because the Brazilian guy was up on me. But I just kept to my game plan, my schedule. Then about halfway through the race, I could hear the crowd die down. And I was like, I must be ahead of him now. So I was like, okay. And I found that motivating when the crowd was dying down. I was like, okay, I'm working towards my goal. I shut the crowd up. And then towards the end, with maybe like 2 laps to go, I could see him ahead of me and I was like, okay, I'm gonna chase him down. And I caught him at the line. So it was very thrilling for me personally, not because I was chasing an expectation of a result, but because I had very specific goals for what I wanted to accomplish.
How was that feeling like, obviously, as you said, having the crowd at Rio cheering you on and cheering for other people versus during Tokyo having it just being silent?
It was very dramatically different. I mean, the feel of Tokyo, it was very difficult in Tokyo to get in a racing mentality. At least it was for me, just because it felt like any other training day. um, I mean, with that said, I was able to get my head in the game, but that was definitely a difference in that regard. And even when there's a crowd that is not necessarily cheering for you, it's still energy in the building that you can draw off of. So I would say that was probably the biggest difference.
While at Tokyo, how did you, obviously, with no crowd, how did you keep your momentum and you still kept going with no crowd?
You basically, I mean, at that level of racing, it's all about the preparation essentially. So you just have to execute what you've been doing. I mean, there's very little different from race day than training days, other than the fact that your body actually feels good on race days. Whereas most training days, your body just feels terrible. Um, but other than that, I mean, it's really just sticking to the mental rehearsal that you've been doing.
Of course, what was that feeling like getting to make your second Paralympic team and get to travel to Tokyo?
That was a great feeling, just because it was my second games, but it was the first games that I objectively made the team. So I felt I mean, I'll admit, I felt very proud of that accomplishment, and I was excited.
Of course, at Rio and Tokyo, was there ever a moment that you were like, oh my God, I made it to the Paralympics and this is my dream coming true?
Um, I don't think I necessarily had that scope in what I was doing. I was mostly just I had my nose to the grindstone. I was trying to do my best to take care of what I needed to take care of. I found it particularly hard to sleep in Tokyo. We had, those cardboard beds that we had were pretty bad. And we had a lot of time on our hands, so I was really trying to keep my mind occupied. So I didn't really focus on myself so much. And what I did end up doing is the majority of the swag that I got, I ended up giving it away to the Japanese volunteers at our remote site, remote village that we had. And I kind of felt like Santa Claus. And I'd pack a duffel full of t-shirts that I didn't really want. And I just walk around to volunteers and like, here, this is for you. So I didn't really have a moment of thinking about myself because I was actively trying not to think about myself.
Of course, while at the Paralympics, was there ever a moment that you saw somebody that you knew that you were like, oh my God, I looked up to you growing up?
Um, Not necessarily because Paralympics, especially something wasn't really on my radar growing up. Um, I did have the opportunity though to see some of the other competitors in other categories. For example, Francois Provy is probably the closest person that fits that description for the question, and that he's the world record holder for the kilo. He set that world record in the kilo right around the time I started getting into track racing, and it just like blew my mind away. It's like, wow, that's such an amazing time. And since that time, he had retired from competing on the able-bodied side, but taken up being a pilot for tandem for the French team. And yeah, he was there, and I got to meet him. And that's probably the most surreal. Like, wow, that's him, Francois.
How does it feel to have Paralympian behind your last name and add PLY?
That's an interesting one for me specifically. I think of it in two ways. I'm very proud of all the things that I've done. Um, I'm very proud to be a Paralympian. I'm proud to call myself a Paralympian. I know it's not an opportunity necessarily just handed out to people. But at the same time, I actually kind of grew up in kind of not the worst neighborhood, but not a great neighborhood. I'd seen gang shootings down the street, from my school or just right outside my elementary school and stuff like that. And like, I have always tried to stay that's kind of how I grew up for a lot of my life, and I try to stay grounded. So like titles in themselves don't necessarily mean a whole lot to me. So it's like, I don't know. I'm proud of what I've done, but the title itself, it's not as meaningful as necessarily like the body of work that took to get to that point.
What does it mean to you to be a U.S. paracyclist?
Um, it's a very proud thing to think about when I think about because like I said earlier, the getting on the national team is difficult because the standard in international cycling is incredibly high. The standard of athletes in the US is incredibly high. And to be a peer of those people is incredibly something I'm very proud of, and I'm humbled to be around many people that I call teammates.
What are some of your favorite moments competing on the Paralympic side?
Some of my favorite moments in the Paralympics. Um, Honestly, I would say it's not the competition that's my favorite. I do love competing, but having competed as long as I have, the things that mean the most to me are the relationships that I make through cycling, whether that be through my competitors who I have admiration and respect for mutually, and also the people that I work with, the staff that help me get to my goals, because I can't get there myself, and I rely on the support system that's in place quite a bit, and the people that I've had the privilege to work with really the difference, not only in the performance, but in the journey to get to the performance.
What was the feeling like getting to put on that cycling uniform with Team USA on the first time versus when you made it to the Paralympics and you got to put it on with the Argonist symbols on it?
I mean, honestly, both sensations are pretty similar. I mean, I remember the first time I got to put on a national championships jersey. Yeah, it was really surreal. And then making making a Paralympic competitive team and getting that cycling kit, it was just like, wow, this is real. And then going in preparation for the games, that's when you get your kit for the games, and then you look at it, you put it on, you go like, wow, this is happening. So it's very similar.
How's it like obviously getting to meet your fans and having them ask for your autographs and photos with you?
Um, that's an interesting question because I wouldn't necessarily say I have a lot of fans. I'm not super well known necessarily. However, with that said, there have been people that have watched me race and want to take a photo or have me sign something, or even just like telling me that they enjoyed watching me race and go like, wow, that was a good time. Like that just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside.
What was that feeling like when you did it at the PLY and you signed it for the first time with the PLY?
um Like I said earlier, I mean, it's not really something I've actually done, if I'm being completely honest, just because of my own personal aversion to titles and whatnot.
Well, of course, how was that moment like the first time you got to put on the Paralympic rings and you saw the US and Argonist symbols on the ring?
It was cool. I mean, I'd say a lot of the experiences associated with going to the games, especially for the first time, some of it is like surreal, and then some of it is like, wow, that's cool. And that was just one of those cool things.
Who are some of the influential people in your career that have shaped you into the cyclist you are today?
That would have to be my former teammates, people that were established before me in cycling and helped me learn about it. I can name a few. The name that sticks out the most is Greta Niemenis. She really helped me get fast tracked into just learning the basics about being on the national team, how to conduct yourself, just things like that, how to just be a generally good person, and be an athlete, because it's not always the case. I remember a pilot for a tandem, Dave Swanson, just he always went out of his way to explain things to me, and made really helped me understand things from the very beginning. One of my current teammates is my longest teammate going is Justin Widholm. He's a great human being. He makes training fun. He's a good character. Yeah, just a tremendous person to be around. Literally an American hero, a war veteran, and just one of the coolest, most humble people you'll ever meet. All he does is work hard, and that's what we do. Is like we go to training, work hard, and then we make fun of each other. And I don't know that I could be as successful as I have been without him and those other people influencing me.
Was it like obviously competing alongside some of your teammates like Allison Days, Muffy, and even Claire Brown?
It's great. I mean, people that it's great being able to compete and train around great people. Um, Clara probably have the most experience training with, and just the level that she's willing to sacrifice her body. um, it, it's it makes me want to match that. Maybe that's a competitive thing, like, oh, Claire's digging deep, I got to dig deep too. But it's just a great thing to witness. And it's like, yeah, that's the standard. That's what we need to be doing.
What would you tell your younger self now, looking back on your career in making the two Paralympics? What would you tell your younger self now?
I would tell a younger version of myself to not stress so much. um, I mean, not that I was ever really a ball of stress, but I can I think like a lot of people, my mind can wander and be like, oh, I don't know if I'm good enough to be here. I definitely had some imposter syndrome when I moved to the Olympic Training Center when I first got on the resident team. Um, that all that stuff, I mean, it was just not anything. It was basically just a waste of mental energy, and I would have been, and whatever I was doing at the time, it would have been better had I just not worried so much.
What has it been like, obviously, getting to live out your Paralympic dream, not once, but twice?
I mean, it's an honor. Uh, a lot of people don't get to make one team, um, and being able to have two, it's not necessarily something that I have like a goal of. Like I want these tally marks to remember my career by, but looking back on it, it makes me proud to know that I've dedicated myself to the process of working hard. And I mean, I would never regret working hard, because just working hard, I feel makes it just leaves an impact on you, and you'll never regret working hard because of how it affects you and the way you do things. And but with that said, having the ability to reflect on competing in two games, it is kind of a way just to summarize essentially the body of work that had been done, or at least a way to commemorate that body of work.
What are some of your future plans in the sport of paracycling?
So we're currently winding up for the next season, which will just include some World Championships and Pan American Games towards the end of the year. But I'm looking at hopefully making the Paris team for the games as my last race before retiring in competitive cycling.
What's that going to feel like, obviously, getting to prepare and compete in Paris?
It's going to be a lot of work. There's no way around that. But I feel like the support system that I have in place um, is great. Like, it's better than it's ever been, and I can rely on everybody to help me get to where I want to be. And I'm hoping to make the team. I can't say that I will or won't just because of the way it works, but I think I've got a pretty good shot. And I don't really want to make the team. I want to medal. And I think I have a good chance of doing so.
What advice would you give those future people that are looking to get into paracycling?
I'd say if you want to get into paracycling, to one, be understanding of how difficult the competitive level is. It's I've known a lot of people that had wanted to get into paracycling that enjoyed cycling, but didn't necessarily have the understanding of the competitive aspect of it. And you can enjoy cycling and have a disability, and not be a competitive team member, and that's totally fine. But if you do want to do paracycling competitively, I would say understand the lay of the land and make sure that you love the sport and just do whatever you can to get your foot in the door, get experience, talk to people that are more experienced than you, to try to shorten that learning curve.
What advice would you give those people that are looking to represent a national team, whether it's Team USA or Canada?
I would say if you're looking to get on a national team in any sport, to make sure that you love the sport first and foremost. You can't, it's not impossible, but it's less likely that you'll succeed at things that you don't love. Just because there are a lot of days, especially in sport, that just, I'll be frank, kind of suck. Your body just aches. You know that what you're about to do in training is going to hurt a lot. Um, every logical part of your brain is going to tell you, what are you doing? You don't need to be doing this. That hurts. Stop it, you know. But loving what you do and falling in love with that process, that's probably the most important thing to get success, to get on national teams, in my opinion.
What advice would you give those first-time Paralympians that are looking to compete as rookies versus the people looking to compete for multiple times as veterans?
I would say for somebody going to the games for the first time, to try to think about the experience in two minds simultaneously. In one aspect, you want to soak it in, you know, be there, be present, take in whatever experience it is, whether it's good or bad. But at the same time, don't get so wrapped up in the oohs and ahs of being there that you forget why you're there. You know, you're there to compete, and put that on the back burner essentially for when you're done competing.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media?
I'm on Instagram at GoFastMurph, so MURPH.
Thank you again, Chris Murphy, for your interview, and best of luck in your future as a U.S. Paralympian paracyclist.
Thank you very much.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Chris Murphy, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
Thank you.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.